This is just a quick book placement, product placement for my books under the author name Derek Hemingway. First, we have the first installment in The Human Saga, which is my epic trilogy of novellas about a future civilization of corporate fascism that is being invaded by an alien cult. We have The Mortician's Daughter, a dark fantasy set in Mesoamerica about a sorceress who blocks out the sun to create a kingdom of darkness and evil, full of ghosts and monsters. It's fucking awesome. Part 2 of the Human Saga, and then part 3. There's currently my first full-length novel in the works, so be on the lookout for that. That's about all. That heathen bastard! Hello everyone, welcome back to That Heathen Bastard. And today we'll be discussing some topic that's the BitChute crowd will be mixed on, because there's a lot of folks over there with some unsavory beliefs and opinions. But remember that this is a platform for talking points, this is not a news show. With that being said, let us get into it right away. I wanted to mention to you all just some in-depth observation thoughts from my position as someone who is both right-wing and LGBT. Now, I obviously wanted to talk about how leftism divides people through representation, or quote representation. Now, obviously, I need to broach the topic first of marginalization of people who are not straight or cisgendered then and now. I hate that I just used the term cisgender. Oh my god. But essentially, back in the day, I think it's important to note the most important element here, and this may be controversial to some on both sides of the aisle: Christianity. Now, if you may not be familiar, obviously Christianity has a pretty implicit anti-gay or anti-homosexual bias in it. And that really has to do with how religion is frequently seriously impacted by the mindset and attitudes of the people who founded it or influenced it at its founding. And it has a lot to do with this dude named Paul, who historically was actually Saul from Tarsus. Saul from Tarsus saw a lot of really messed up shit during his travels in Greece, and that became his impression of homosexuality from there on in. Now, suffice to say, in the pre-Christian era, there was anti-homosexual sentiment, but it was very marginal. Hardly any. It was widely accepted within Western civilization, and it was even traditional to have homosexual union for hundreds of years. But people would still sometimes get negative attitudes based on bad first impressions. And that's kind of where it comes from. Yeah, the impact of a bad first impression was so great that that a principal member of an entire religion based his worldview off a bad impression, and that affected people for thousands of years. See how important first impressions are? Maybe the LGBT community creates most of its own enemies. Just a thought. But suffice to say, that really is kind of where it comes from, that and people's misinterpretation of certain scriptures. The influence of Christianity, and to some extent Islam, is the reason why anti-gay or anti-LGBT sentiment is so common among some certain people groups, and why marginalization in Western civilization, or Christianized Western civilization, has been so prevalent. In the past, you had things like fear and intimidation, beatings, attacks, rapes, murders and then the murders really went unanswered by the law. People didn't really take the pressing of charges very seriously. The legal framework of the country was perfectly set up to include anti-gay hate crimes as something that could be punished by the law, but there were very few people in the system willing to do that. So you got the Stonewall riots. You had a lot of fear and oppression of the LGBT community, which in the modern times has greatly diminished as LGBT acceptance has grown and grown. Although due to activism and behavior of that community recently, it has gone back down a bit because essentially there's a lot of like immoral behavior and disgustingness of late that has brought approval back down again. So, yay! So you see how that works. You don't work against people, you work with people if you want to make progress. You necessarily have to compromise, although you don't want to compromise too much. Too much of a bad thing, too much of a good thing is automatically a bad thing. So that's more or less how it was then. The horrible treatment, the lack of representation, the inability to get any real justice, versus now where pro LGBT messaging is practically everywhere. It's become commonplace. Gay marriage is legal in many places, although not as widespread as it could be. There's still 38 states that don't allow it. Generally speaking, the war is still being fought, but great progress has been made. It is much better to be LGBT now than it was then. It has gotten a great deal better. That is due in large part to the sort of left-wing representation I'm talking about, but it's become something of a barrier at this point. Now, I obviously need to mention social progress from a right-wing perspective. That being, the right wing believes generally that society is a net positive, that in spite of any mistakes or errors or horribleness that might have occurred, it is still overall a positive gain that society exists the way it does. We take it from a position that society is great, precisely because tradition has made it great. And therefore societal progress is more of an, okay, we made a mistake, we'll fix it. That's sort of a compromise, and a reasonable compromise at that, typically. And generally speaking, it has been reasonable compromise with the LGBT and the right wing. But oftentimes that compromise comes very slowly, or at times not at all. So you might ask yourself, well, why would an LGBT person, or LGB person as I prefer, want to be right wing? I'll get to that in a minute. But suffice to say, that is sort of the view of social progress to be had here. It really comes from an acceptance that we made a mistake, and not only changing laws, but changing attitudes, while otherwise maintaining the spirit of tradition and the spirit of the law, that all men were created equal. We merely include gay people in that all men. Now, in regards to friends, supporters, and allies, it's an interesting dynamic that exists there. Because the thing is, you can always tell, generally speaking, when someone's a true friend or true supporter, and when they're faking it for good boy points, or trying to get something out of it. There's always a way to tell. I think the biggest way to tell would be how often they talk about it, or how loudly they speak about it, and what their actions actually show. Like, do they actually support you with their actions, or do they or do they support a prescribed path to representation? Meaning, do they actually support you, or do they support some overarching group? That being said, there's plenty of people who are genuine supporters and allies and friends, and then there are fakers. They're huge fakers. People who are more concerned with how they appear than actually doing the right thing. And I can tell you right now, a lot of the people who are more concerned with their appearance are on the left wing. There, I said it. Leftists are more concerned with appearances than with substance. Burn me alive for being tribal. Burn me alive! Ha 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 ha! I mean it. The left wing has no morals, only what is politically convenient for them at the time. That being said, there are many principled progressives, like Tulsi Gabbard, for example. There's tons of stuff I would disagree with her on, but at least I can say for certain that she is principled. She will not argue in bad faith. She is not a tribalistic moron. She's not a SJW. But still, I said it. They're more worried about their personal appearance than actually supporting people. And this comes to the position of personal honor. I know that modern society rejects personal honor as non sequitur, but it's funny. People say they don't care about their reputation until they do. Suddenly, when your reputation is on the line, suddenly you care. It's like, oh, I don't care what people think of me, until their opinion of you starts turning negative and you begin to see the consequences. Then suddenly you do. So, is it really a non sequitur? No, no, it not. It was never a non sequitur. This is how human civilization is set up. It's organic. You can never create a system that avoids it completely. An honorable reputation is needed in society, which is why some people are in a rush to have an honorable appearance and an honorable vestige. And really, when it comes right down to it, what you should be really worried about is moral action. Instead of worrying about the reputation itself, you should worry about its source. What you should do is you should figure out what the right thing is, and then just do the right thing and let the rest take care of itself, and then not worry about the opinions of people who are unreasonable. The only opinions that matter are the opinions of people who are reasonable and are willing to change their views to fit the facts. Which, honestly, anymore, that's fewer and fewer people all the time. Really, the opinions of people who are unreasonable really shouldn't matter. And I mean that. I do not mean that as a discriminatory idea. That's just a fact. But in the end, what this difference between genuinely honorable people and people who are merely faking it, you can always tell. The Romans had this concept called veritas, meaning that truth had a sound, right? That truth sounded a certain way when coming from a person. And more or less, FBI forensics have confirmed this idea. There's truthful and untruthful body language. There's truthful and untruthful speech. Untruthful speech always sounds very uncertain. There's a lot of defensive body language, occasionally stammering and murmuring, because you have to come up with the lie as you go along. And that gap between thinking creates a brief pause where the stammering and murmuring takes place of words. Whereas if you're telling the truth, you already know the truth because you don't have to make anything up, and therefore there's no stammering or murmuring. Also, the truth frequently sounds very confident and certain. It does not sound like something someone made up or something that someone has forced themselves to accept as a matter of cognitive dissonance. So that is essentially veritas. You can always tell. Like, when they claim they support, for example, bisexuals, you ask them a question like, did you know 67% of straight women would never date a bisexual man because they think they would give them AIDS? And then watch as an actual supporter of you would, who didn't know about it would say, well, no, I didn't know that. Can we talk about it? And they're like, sure. Someone who is not a genuine supporter and is just in it for appearances or to get something out of it will be like, well, that is. And they do that because they have to have the appearance of being a supporter, right? So they should have known that, right? They have the responsibility on themselves to have known that in order to maintain the act. You hit them with something they didn't know, and now they become ashamed of themselves because they're being pressured into an act. Whereas someone who is genuinely supporting you is not feeling the pressure because they're not being pressured into an act. It's coming from a place of genuine willingness to be in support of you. And therefore, there's no pressure to know things. They will be genuinely ignorant of it, and when you bring it up with them, they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't know that. Thank you for telling me." You can always tell by how people respond. That is veritas. And with that being said, typically speaking, when I talk to the left about this sort of stuff, which is not as often as I would like it to be, because I want to be out there and want to talk about this stuff, I don't really see Veritas from them. I see Veritas from the right or from people who are left of center. I don't see it from leftists. They're not in it for a genuine reason. Now, this is how the left represents marginalized peoples, traditionally speaking. When it comes right down to it, it all comes down to wanting to support or look like you're supporting in order to avoid looking like a bigot and being on the quote-unquote right side of history. And that actually comes from Marxist and neo-Marxist philosophy. The idea that history has an end and that you want to be on the right side of history and be a winner. That history will eventually end and we will finally achieve the ultimate end of humanity, which is the communist utopia. You want to be on the right side of history. That's where that comes from. They're more interested in themselves. They are selfishly motivated and they're interested in being on the right side of history. And that is how they represent marginalized peoples, by being on the right side, supposedly. And what this often means is that they will have a prescribed left-wing solution to the issue of representation. And they will demand absolute loyalty to that motive. It's not about you, it's about the ideology. It's not about your problems, it's about how they can supposedly fix those problems. It's not about being LGBT, it's about Marxism. It's about leftism. It's about socialism. It's about liberalism. It's always about some ulterior motive. And that is how the representation, air quotes, has divided the community. Because they demand from you absolute loyalty to the higher agenda of either Marxism, socialism, or just generalized progressivism. And when you are an LGBT person or even a black person, if you ask any from the black community that disagrees with those economic and political policies, they turn on you and they treat you as an other. Because they're not about you, they're about the ideology. So they toss you aside because you're not all in for Marxism. And this is how they sow division. They present you with a means to represent you and demand that you are loyal to it 100%. And if you're not, they toss you aside because you're not useful to them. They are using you to sell people on their bullshit. They're used car salesmen. And the right wing, by the way, does have an inherent solution in it to fix many LGBT problems, but they can't afford to tell, and they usually know that, but they can't afford to tell you that. Because if the used car salesman tells you that there's a better parking lot a couple blocks down and across the street, then why should you buy any cars from him? Right? They don't actually care about you, they're just using you to get what they want. They pretend to represent you so you'll be loyal to their cause. You're the new proletariat. And straight people are, straight cisgendered people are the new bourgeoisie. And this is how they sow division. If you disagree with the ideology, they toss you aside. And we see it more and more all the time. This is why you do not serve secondary causes when aiding others. And this is why you do not want ulterior motives. An ulterior motive always creates a traitor. Because as soon as their ulterior motive becomes superior to your motive, they abandon you in a heartbeat. I just want to be treated fairly. I don't want all this Marxism crap attached to it. Right? I don't want any baggage attached to my being treated fairly in society. But if leftists are the one trying to represent you, then baggage is precisely what you'll get. And as soon as the ulterior motive is superior to your motive, they will abandon you. I'm going on a diatribe here. I'm pontificating. I do that. But this is why you do not serve secondary causes when aiding others. When you aid someone else in their struggles, that should be a priority. Their struggles. Nothing else should be on the plate until that's solved. Then, in the interest of reciprocity, of course, you can return the favor by fulfilling one of their struggles. But when you're aiding someone else, their struggle is the priority. Period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There can be no other motive other than helping that person, either out of the kindness of your heart, or if for the admittedly selfish motivation of wanting someone's gratitude so they'll come and help you with something someday. And if you want someone to be truly grateful to you, then you have to drop everything and help them with every ounce of your being. There can be no other motive. And in the interest of reciprocity, what do we do for society? What do we do when they actually decide to throw us a bone and help us out? Well, we do the same. We throw them a bone, we help them out. I take care of you. I take care of you. You take care of me. You take care of me. I take care of you. We take turns. Society took care of the LGBT community when they started actually showing genuine support, and actually was setting up shelters and supports and the Trevor Project and actually allowing gay marriage and blah, 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 blah. I respond to that with throwing society a bone. I throw society a bone by supporting those things I think are in the best interest of society, which, hint, hint, ain't leftism. Yeah, because socialist economic theory is naive. Every PhD economist who've actually taken the time to take a serious look at works like Das Kapital have specified quite clearly it is a very naive form of theory, and it never works. It will kill society and starve millions. So I cannot, in good conscience, support it. And I cannot support the leftist approach of representation. So, is there a right-wing approach? Yes, there is. The right-wing approach is to familiarize yourself with the system that exists and use it to get better treatment and to get justice. And within the English language, the word men or man is a homonym. It may also mean male person, but it also means human in the generic sense. And men is therefore humans. When it says all men are created equal in the United States Constitution, that means all men. Therefore, we do have equal rights, and we can argue for that. We can cite the Constitution. We can cite case law. We can cite the ever so wonderful Stonewall riots. We can mention how the law protects from persecution, and we can condemn those who refuse to allow the system to do its job. If a judge is corrupt and doesn't want to get us justice, we can get that judge removed through the appropriate democratic process. The right-wing approach is to know the system inside and out and use it to get what you want. And those are the people who truly understand society. People who approach it from a position of pure criticism don't understand shit. So there you go. This is how they divide us. This is how they divide us by trying to make us fulfill our ulterior motive. Please themselves first before they please us. That is how they do it. And they will deny it right up until the very end. There's even some LGBT people who are so just asleep. They cannot see, the writing on the wall. These people don't care about you. They care about Marxism. They care about their ideology. They care about the ideas that starve millions and denying that they starve millions. So there you go. There will be a link in the description below to my books. Please buy, download, read them, and as always, choose. Peace.